Yeah, I know. I'm running a little behind on my intended weekly video postings. Life knocked me on my ass during the past couple of weeks, and it took me a few days to recover and to actually start catching back up on things. But I'm back, and this week we're going to take a little bit of a different turn and talk about a camera that gets overlooked in the Four Thirds conversation. It's not one of the beloved Kodak CCD models that everyone, including me, raves about, but it still has its own individual qualities that makes it stand out from the rest of the herd. The camera that I'm talking about is the Olympus E-30. Now, for the sake of brevity for this video, I'm going to hit just on the highlights. I'm going to go over a few things about the camera, I'm going to share some images, and I'm going to talk about my thoughts about the E-30. Now, if you really want to dig into the nitty-gritty of the E-30, there's a solid review about it on dpreview.com that was done some time ago. And there's also a fantastically detailed review of it at mikeekman.com. In that review, he doesn't just talk about the specs and the features. He goes down to the quantum level of how specific functions work, like metering, autofocus, and flash, and image stabilization, and so forth. It's obvious he spent an incredible amount of time doing the research and writing that review. So if you're interested in the E-30, I would highly recommend that review to answer any specific questions you might have. I'll post it in the description of this video, and I'll probably also go ahead and pin it in the comments. Now, the E-30 was released by Olympus in November 2008, and in one particular way, it was a standalone body that had no variants or common siblings. For example, Olympus designated its flagship cameras with just one number, like the E1, the E3, and the E5. The consumer lineup of cameras were designated with three numbers, like the E300, the E500, the E600, and so forth. Now, and individual lines in that consumer series had multiple variants, like you had the E500, the E510, the E520, and so forth and so on. The E-30 was the only mid-tier two-number DSLR produced by Olympus for their Four Thirds system, and despite the 30 in the name, there were no other mid-tier variants like an E10 or an E20 in the Four Thirds stable. Before Olympus started its Four Thirds DSLR series of cameras, it introduced the E10 and E20, and they were groundbreaking DSLR cameras. However, those were fixed lens cameras, and they used a different sensor type than the Four Thirds DSLRs did. They were never part of the Four Thirds system, but I guess Olympus just decided to pick up the naming convention by calling the E-30 the E-30, even though the E10 and E20 were not part of the Four Thirds suite of bodies. And what I'll go ahead and do right now is I'll go ahead and show you the E-30, and I'm going to try to keep this camera away from the microphone so you can hear me and there's no distortions, but this is the E-30 right here. And I'll let you see the front and the back of it and the side so you can get a little kind of a general feel for what it looks like. It's not very big in the hand. It's probably just a little bit, well, it is just a little bit bigger than the E500, and feels really solid and everything. And we'll talk some more about the features and the functionality of it. But right now, I just want you to I got to line it up here in the monitor, just make sure you can see it right. See all the buttons and things on it. Everything's reversed in the monitor, so it's like a mirror image. I have to work it back and forth till I figure out what I'm doing. Now, in an interesting twist, the E-30 leapfrogged the E3 flagship camera by coming out with the same or better specs overall than the E3, but in a smaller and lighter body. In fact, the body is only slightly larger than the E500 that I was talking about. The big compromise with the E-30, though, is the absence of an inner metal frame or chassis, and this camera does not have the same kind of weatherproofing that the flagship cameras have. But for a lot of folks back then, the E-30 was an ideal choice because you got better specs than the current flagship, or, the same specs, and in a couple of cases there were better specs, but you also got it in a smaller and lighter form factor with a price that was a few $100s less than that top shelf offering. Now, if I remember right, the E3 was around $1,700 or so when it was released, and the E30 was released at a price of around $1,300. In fact, for a while, Olympus sold the E30 with the 14 to 54 millimeter f2.8 to 3.5 2 as the kit lens in the bundle for about $1,400, so about $100 more. And the 14 to 54 was definitely not what you would consider a typical kit lens. It was so much better than that. But getting that lens for an extra $100 with the E30 was quite the steal back in those days. Now, no, the E30 does not have the Kodak sensor. It features a 12 megapixel Panasonic LiveMo sensor with a max image size of about 4032 by 3024. That's in pixels. But it did have a couple other tricks up its sleeve. For starters, the E30 included in-body image stabilization that Olympus claimed could provide up to 5 stops of reduced camera shake. Now, I don't know how that extreme number, how valid that number was for the time, but I know that I can reliably get 3 to 4 stops of image stabilization with this E30 really without breaking a sweat at all. Now, the E30 still features the company's proprietary, can't even talk, supersonic wave filter system that cleans the sensor with a piezo system that vibrates the sensor so that dust falls off onto like a little sticky piece of tape. And back in the day, it was recommended that you replace that tape every so often, but I don't think that's really an option anymore, at least for these cameras. Now, the E30 also hit the ground running with the 11-point TTL phase detect autofocus system that was introduced with the E3 flagship the year before. Additionally, the E30 offered the same live view system as found in the E3 for using the rear LCD, and what I'll do is I'll go ahead and show this to you. This has a flip out articulating LCD, not bad for back in the day. You can close it like that if you want to protect it, or you can open it back up and then you can flip it around. It's a fully articulating LCD. Not bad for the times there. But that was for using the rear LCD to take pictures using contrast autofocus with that live view system. However, I would like to point out again that the E30 here had a 12 megapixel sensor when the current flagship only had a 10 megapixel sensor at the time. So it was a true leapfrog in some particular ways. Now, on top of that, the E30 featured this fully articulating screen like the E3, but this screen was slightly larger at 2.7 inches instead of 2.5 inches on the E3, and this was also an improved version, and it was called the Hypercrystal TTF or TFT 2 LCD. Now, and that's just the basics of the E30. The E30 was absolutely packed to the gills with the very best features and specifications that really are way too numerous for me to try and cover in this video, because this really isn't a technical review. It's kind of a historic overview of the camera, but I'll go ahead and run through some of the bullet points just to kind of give you a basic idea. The E30 shoots in both RAW and JPEG, and it can shoot in both those formats at the same time. There are 2 card slots. There's one for compact flash and one for the abysmally slow and extremely expensive XD card. I'll be honest, it's really not even worth getting these days unless you just want to have that backup as insurance. There are 5 different focus modes, including autofocus, manual focus, there's single shot and continuous modes, and there's one other mode. It's slipped my mind at the time. But there's also 5 exposure modes, including aperture, shutter, manual, program, and auto. The ISO range goes from 100 to 3200, but you really do want to stay away from anything above ISO 800 because of the smaller sensor size These 4/3 DSLRs are just not great at low light images. There are five, Olympus is big on five. There's five metering modes, including spot, ESP, center weighted, highlight spot, and shadow spot. Now, if you want to get in and kind of do your own little customizations, it offers exposure steps that are either a half or 1/3 of a stop, and it offers up to 5 stops of negative or 5 stops of positive exposure compensation. There is exposure bracketing and also white balance bracketing. The exposure bracketing is good because these cameras are very easy to blow the highlights. White balance bracketing I don't care about so much because I can do whatever but white balance I want in post-processing. And there are also a ton of image parameters for those folks that like to shoot in like the JPEG modes. And those modes include black and white with toning options and sepia toning, art filters, and there's also some fine tuning controls included in the mix for JPEGs, like sharpness, contrast, and things like that, saturation. So you've got all kinds of things you can play with inside of the camera to make those images, those JPEGs, look exactly the way that you want them to look right out of camera if you're the type of person that doesn't like to work on RAW files. There are not 5, but 4 drive modes, and those include single, continuous, timer, and remote. And the timer function allows you up to either 2 or 12 seconds. There is a built-in pop-up flash and an autofocus assist lamp. There's a dedicated white balance, and I will show that to you. I don't know if you can see if you can see it. It's right. Hang on one second here. See if I can find a way to show this to you. I don't know if you can see it, but it's right here at the top of the camera, right next to the viewfinder hump. But it's an external white balance sensor that takes a reading of the scene, and it gives you much better white balance information. If you want to set your camera on auto white balance. But like I said, you can set whatever white balance you want. But for those folks that like to shoot JPEGs and they want something pretty accurate, that external sensor helps a tremendous amount. And you don't get that. I don't think you get that in any of the 300, or not the 300, but the 3-letter bodies in the DSLR lineup. But you do get it with cameras like the E1 and E3 and so forth. Now, the viewfinder offers a 98% field of view at up to 102% magnification, depending on the lens that you're using and the diopter setting. But that's pretty good. 98% field of view with a viewfinder like this, that's really good for the time period. Now, there's a ton of playback functions. They include a slideshow, a calendar, histogram, RGB histogram, and a lot more that you can play with. The user can also select from a wide swath of image information to be played back, such as aperture, metering, shutter speed, ISO, color space, focal length, focus area, file name, image size, and the list goes on and on and on as far as the file information that you can display whenever you bring up each image. Now, all of that is just some of the stuff that's contained in the E30, and there's a lot more where all of that came from. Like most of the medium to large Olympus DSLRs, the E30 can use the BLM1 or BLM5 batteries. And then there's also an optional battery grip, the HLD4, that can be attached to the E30 for more grip area when you're using those larger lenses like the 35 to 100 or the 150 millimeter f2. That battery grip will also work with the E3 and the E5 as well. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there is no metal frame in the body of the E30. The body is made of a glass reinforced plastic, but honestly, it does not feel dinky or cheap, and it doesn't really flex in the hand. It feels solid and well made, and it will definitely stand up to the knocks of constant use by an enthusiast photographer. But aside from the general build quality, it's how everything is brought together into the E30 that really makes it a true joy to use in comparison to some of the other cameras. On this channel, I've talked a little bit before about my frustration with like the E300 and the button layout and how finicky it was to get to certain features and so forth. You don't have that issue here. On the back of the E30, and I'll show this to you again. Let me turn it the right way here, just so you can see it. And let's see if it's in focus there. And I'll bring up a picture or a video of it just so you can see it while I'm talking. But on the back of the E-30, there's a nice selection of physical buttons that provide direct access to the most common settings and features that you're going to use while you're out and taking photos. And what I'll go ahead and do, just so you have an idea again, is go through just a quick list of the buttons that are placed in a really logical and well thought out position on this camera for easy access and easy activation. There's AF mode selection, there's drive mode and metering mode selection via the thumb wheel and D-pad. There's a custom function button, AF point selection button, exposure lock button, and autofocus lock button. There's a playback button, trash can, info, menu, live view. There's an image stabilization button, so you can quickly get in there and change your image stabilization options. And on top of the camera, there is, and I'll let you look at that there. And again, I'll put up a picture so it's easier for you to see. But on top, there's a light button, white balance, and there's two other buttons for exposure compensation and ISO. There's also a button up front on the left, and if you can see where my hand is here, next to the viewfinder hump here, the pentaprism hump, that right there is your pop-up flash button. And I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll turn the camera on, and then you hit this and pops the flash right up for you. Okay, and I'll turn the camera back off. So all of those buttons, like I said, are very well placed. They're easy to access, and most all of them work in conjunction with one of the control dials or the D-pad. And speaking of the D-pad, that's located right here. You see that. That's almost like having 5 other complete buttons, including the OK button. That's in the middle. Now, the OK button is the way that you bring up the super menu from the D-pad. And the super menu gives you access to most of the settings that the physical buttons do, but also a few other things that you can't access directly. And those are things like sharpness and contrast and face detect and color space, image type or quality, and flash compensation. Those types of things don't have a physical button that you can, directly access to change. But I'll tell you, just all you got to do is just hit that OK button, boom. It brings up the super menu, and you can get in there and move around really quickly, and you can find whatever you're looking for and make changes pretty fast. Not as fast as you can with the buttons, but it's still pretty fast, and it's still very intuitive as well. Now, with a max shutter speed of 1/8,000th of a second, the plethora of physical buttons and feature-rich menu that provides all of the different functionality that the E30 has, the E30 really is an action-packed camera, and it was extremely action-packed for its day and its price point when it was released. Even after 18 years, after it was released, an advanced photographer can take this camera and do incredible work with it and not really feel like there's any necessary functionality that's been left out. And it's basically a 20-year-old camera. Now, granted, it's not as technically as advanced as today's cameras are and doesn't have the same number of autofocus points or doesn't have the same autofocus speed, but it is still a serious tool. And the good thing is you can buy one of these for a song right now. Right now, the average price on one of these in good condition, or let's say, kind of good to decently good is about 200 to 225, and that's US dollars. If you want one that's in mint condition, you might have to pay, $250 to $300. But even then, if it's in that kind of condition, I think it's worth it for everything that you get in this camera. Anyway, I got way more into the weeds than I intended to do, but while this isn't a true technical review on the E-30, I still wanted to provide a somewhat thorough overview, at least, of its features and its capabilities. But what really matters to everyone, especially, including me, is how do the images look? And I'm sure this is especially at the front of the minds of the Kodak CCD fans out there, knowing that the E-30 has a Panasonic LiveMOS sensor inside, or some people call it LiveMOS. I put together a slideshow for you just to give you an idea of the image quality you can expect from this camera. And and not just the quality, but kind of the color rendition and the tonality of it. There's more to an image than just sharpness or resolution. There's this hidden depth sometimes that gets missed when people look at images. There's other things that kind of comprise an image, other than just straight up sharpness and that kind of thing. Now, the images in this slideshow were taken with a variety of lenses, including the 11 to 22, the 150 millimeter f2, the 12 to 60, the 14 to 35, the 50 millimeter f2, the 7 to 14 millimeter f4, the 50 to 200, and also even the 35 to 100 f2. So there's a good representation of lenses in here. I would love to be able to tell you or show you the camera and settings for every picture. I'm trying to find a way to automatically write that information, that metadata, onto the images themselves, showing things like camera, lens, aperture, ISO, focal length, and so forth. But right now, I haven't figured out a reliable way to do that yet automatically, and doing it manually for each image in a show would be way too time consuming. So if anybody knows of a solution, I would greatly appreciate it. Mainly what I'm looking for is just a way to have an image, extract the metadata from that image, and then put specific metadata image onto the image itself. Maybe have a border and then have that metadata image on there, rather than me doing it individually like in Photoshop. If there was a way to automate that, that would be fantastic. And if anybody knows, I would greatly appreciate it. By the way, here's another thing. In a few of these images, you're going to see my buddy Timber in these photos. I spend a ton of time with him, and I like to see him have fun, and I want memories of his and my good times together. So he's going to be in there quite a few times, and hopefully you'll understand. And just like last time, I included some shots just because of their color or tonality, not so much for composition. I also tried to take some shots with lots of stuff happening, with bunches of details, so you could get a feel for the sharpness and the resolution on top of color and tonality and all those other things. Of course, some of that's going to depend on the specific lens that was used for each photo. So you kind of have to bear that in mind a little bit. Some are going to look great, some are going to look not so great, but I'll leave that up to you. So go ahead and take a look at the slideshow, and I'll be back afterwards to share my personal views about the E-30 once you've had a chance to form an opinion of your own. And there you go. I'm curious what your thoughts are about the images taken with the E-30. Take a minute to share your take on the E-30 in the comments below, or if you've ever used the E-30 before, let everybody in the comments know what your experience has been, and share any tips that you found that help you get the most out of the E-30 during your own photo sessions. Now, despite my love for the E1, and the E1 will always be my favorite camera, and my love for the Kodak CCD sensor in a few of the cameras like the E500, E400, and E300, despite all that, I really, really do like the E30 quite a bit. To be honest, with a program like Lightroom or Capture One or other RAW editing programs, you can get the color and tone curve to be whatever you want it to be. You can change things like hue and saturation and color temperature, sharpness and contrast, and then you've got a high degree of fine-tuning available with the highlight, midtone, and shadow tables in the color grading section of Lightroom. You can take a filmic looking picture and you can turn it inside out and upside down, and you can end up 50 miles from an image that looks like film. Or you can turn an ultra clean and clinical digital image into something that looks like it came from an 80s era film camera. So as much as people talk about the look of an image from a particular camera sensor, and I'm as guilty as anybody else, probably more guilty, you can still pretty much change that look to whatever you want it to be. I've never had an issue working with the E1's files, and as much as I love the images that come from some of those other cameras, the E30 I can turn it into whatever I want. And I'll grant you, the images that come out of the E30 do look slightly different than what I see from some of the other cameras, but it's not so far off that I can't get there in, just a few seconds with a few tweaks and minor adjustments, and I'm where I want to be on these. For me, the strong selling point of the E30 is the very full suite of features and controls in a relatively compact and lightweight package. I mean, look at it. It packs the punch of an E5 without all that extra girth. And the other biggie for me on this camera is the image stabilization. With some of the longer 4/3 lenses that I like to use, it's nice to squeeze out a few extra stops of reduced camera shake, particularly since the 4/3 sensors, they don't do that well at higher ISOs. Image stabilization means that I can keep that ISO number lower for a longer period of time. Now, I never picked up an E3 before. I just kind of skipped right to the E5. But the E30 was the first Olympus camera that I tried that had image stabilization, though the two E5s that I picked up as well, they have it too. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it was, what was it? The E510, I think, was the first Olympus DSLR to come out with image stabilization. But before that, none of the other, three-digit cameras had image stabilization in them. And that's why I really, really do like this. For those lenses I like to use, like the 50 to 200 and the 35 to 100, those are fantastic lenses, and you get a little bit more from them when you use a camera like this that has that in-body image stabilization. Now, the articulating screen, it's nice, at least, for the time period when it was made. But honestly, I rarely use it on this camera, except in extreme cases where I have to put the camera in a really, really awkward position and I can't use the viewfinder and so forth. And even then, though, it's not a guaranteed shot because you're limited to contrast, autofocus, and live view. That means you have to spend a little extra time verifying that you got everything you got that perfect shot, and you might want to take 2 or 3 extras just to be on the safe side. I'm also a fan of that extra stop of speed that I get with that shutter. You can get 1/8,000th of a second from this, just like the E5 flagship camera. That makes it easier for me to play around with lenses like the Sigma 50mm f1.4 and the Panasonic 25mm f1.4, though there are days, and there's still times on bright days when 1/8,000th of a second still isn't fast enough when I've got it opened up to f1.4, but it beats what I can do on those 3-digit cameras like the E300 and E500 that don't have image stabilization and don't have that 1/8,000th of a second shutter speed. I think most of those are limited to 1/4,000th, if I'm not mistaken. Overall, I'm very happy with the user experience of the E30 and how easy it is to get to the settings that I need to change very quickly. While I like the physical layout of the buttons and their ease of use on the E1 better, and I bragged about that in another video, the E30 has the advantage of the super menu. And the super menu gives you that quick access to more granular controls that you don't really have access to directly with a physical button. The E1 did not have that super menu. And with this thing here, you just hit the OK button, boom, the super menu pops up. You can get in there, you can change what you need to change, and then boom, you're back out very quickly. That is one huge advantage that this has over the E1. I wish this just had the E1's ergonomics, but that'll never happen. My dream has always been for them to come out with like an OM1 Mark III, but put it in the E1 body, but never going to happen. The only real downside to the E30 that I've noticed is the bit depth of the RAW files. The E30 has a bit depth of 12 bits for RAW images and 10 bits for JPEGs. Now, you go back in time, similarly spec'd cameras and the cameras that were in the same price range from Canon and Nikon, like the 50D and the D300, they were capable of capturing images at 14 bits. Now, that doesn't sound like a massive difference, 12 bits and 14 bits, but when you get down to it and you do the math, that's the difference between 68 billion colors for 12-bit and trillions of possible colors with 14-bit. It also makes a difference in how much latitude you have when you're editing RAW photos. Sometimes when you push an image too far, you start to get that posterization or that kind of weird sheen or weird kind of look to the image. A lot of that is due to the fact that some files don't have that extra bit depth to where you can get in and really get into that deep tonal range. It's just the information is just not available. I mean, that's the same way as medium format cameras. Like the Fuji GFX 100. It has a 16-bit sensor compared to 14-bit sensors on most DSLRs that are out, full-frame DSLRs that are out there this day. A 16-bit image can show off about 281 trillion different colors. The 14-bit, full-frame sensor is going to be capped right around 4.4 trillion colors. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that everybody can see 281 trillion different colors. That's not what it's all about. What it is that extra bit depth gives you that really smooth gradation of colors and tones and things when you're pushing something. If you don't have the right exposure and you need to raise shadows or you need to extend something else, you have that very deep file that allows you that flexibility to get in there and make all those changes. And while you're not going to see, that 281st trillionth color, that tonal range and that bit depth is going to give you the flexibility that the image looks right overall when you're looking at it kind of from a bird's eye view. Either way, I'm still happy with the E30, even with the 12-bit files. And considering the price that you can get it for these days, there's nothing at all worth complaining about, in my opinion, unless you're a low light junkie and you like to crank up the ISO on a camera. This camera is not made for that. Most Olympus Four Thirds DSLRs are not made for that. In a case like that, you probably want to be looking at something from that that same era, like the Nikon D700, which was a 12 megapixel full frame camera. And those are selling in good condition, and some of them you can get with a 6-month to 1-year warranty for around $300 to $400. It's a little bit more than this right here, but it's going to give you that access to those higher ISOs, if you like to get out and about in those low light situations. And don't even get me started on the D700. That camera is also an icon from the early days of digital photography, and I've never tried it yet, but it's definitely going to be on the agenda for me in the near future. So that's about it for the Olympus E-30. I hope you got some useful information out of this video, or at least got a little insight as to how it operates and what my thoughts and feelings are about it and what kind of images you can obtain with it. While it doesn't have some of the same features a lot of us have associated with Olympus DSLRs, such as that Kodak CCD, it still has its own place in the lineup with features and specs that leave some of its siblings, actually most of its siblings, in the dust. It turns out beautiful images, especially, with the mid-tier and the super high-grade lenses, and it's definitely worthy of carrying the Olympus name. I just think it gets overlooked quite a bit in favor of either flagship cameras or the Kodak CCD cameras, and I just don't hear this one being talked about enough, and I think it deserves some attention, and it's well worth your time, to go out, try one, and see what you can do with it. So, thanks for stopping by once again and checking out this video. You know the drill. If you learned something or got some value from the video, I would deeply appreciate it if you could hit the like and subscribe button, or better yet, jump into another video of mine to wake up the algorithm. I'll post a couple in here to make it easy for you, and I'll try to be back sooner the next time around. I'm going to try to double up try to do 2 videos in a week just so I can catch up. But I'll be back fairly soon with something else. In the meantime, take care of yourself, and I'll talk to you soon.